Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Cause and Effect. And today we're going to be talking about that feeling of constant busyness, which we often see across the sector, and what this means for you and your culture at work. Now, this busyness isn't necessarily intentional. Nobody has decided that the expectation is that everyone is always available, and no one is telling the staff that they need to stay late and work all the time. Your organization cares about its staff, your values reflect this. When you recruit, your job adverts highlight generous annual leave allowance and staff benefits like EAP. At interview and when you're inducting your new staff, you emphasize the importance of work life balance and staff well-being. But the reality can be very different. And we can see this on a Wednesday evening when you and half your team are logging back on to catch up, or on a Saturday morning when you're checking your phone messages that you probably could have waited till Monday to look at. The trouble is, when you are trying to hold it all together and do everything, your team see it. And although you tell them that it isn't the expectation, they internalize it just like you have, and it becomes the norm. And if you add into the mix the shared belief that the sector is hard, that there is too much to do, and that you just have to get on with it, it's no wonder you have a culture where you're all busy and always doing has become the norm and just crept in. But this doesn't look like an organization that's in crisis. This looks like an organization of people who are dedicated and who care and who are putting their work first. And so when this has become the norm, it can sometimes be really difficult to see that actually the way you're all working is problematic. And we can see this play out in a number of different ways. The first is this constant busyness, which I've mentioned. If you ask anyone how their week is going, their answer will be busy, as usual, and it will often be accompanied by a knowing look and an eye roll. The default has become to respond to the urgency around you because everything feels important. And along the way, the question of what's actually realistic to achieve has been forgotten. Instead, people respond to that urgency by firefighting, by jumping from task to task, by overcommitting and inevitably under-delivering, which means that they feel worse about themselves, which means they work harder to compensate and they overcommit again. And this sense of busyness really becomes a badge of honor and the thing that bonds us and ties us together. The second thing we might see is your teams working additional hours as a matter of course, not as a one off to respond to a crisis, but to just do it day to day. They start work early, they stop late to fit everything in and around back to back meetings and phone calls. They check in on Sunday evening to mentally prepare for the week ahead. And this means that there's just a low level of exhaustion that is running through the organization. Everyone is just accepted as normal. The third is that presenteeism has become the unwritten rule. Even when you're telling your staff not to come in when they're sick, everyone just still rocks up. They work through illness because there is too much to do. And if they don't, they're simply going to have to play catch up. And unfortunately, in some organizations, there is a quiet criticism of anyone who does take time off, because after all, it's just a cold, isn't it? The fourth is that performance issues go unaddressed because we know how busy everyone is. Poor outcomes, missed targets, and forgotten work get explained away rather than being dealt with. You don't want to stress them out anymore. And so, what feels like a compassionate act in the moment becomes a pattern that carries real risk with it for your team, for the communities you're serving, and for your organization's contracts and reputation. And finally, in all of this busyness, the strategic work gets lost because everyone, including you, is caught up in the day to day. And that strategic work keeps getting pushed back. And it becomes the worry at the back of your mind that's constantly nagging. So, why does this happen? The first reason is that this way of working is the norm across the sector. For the 20 odd years I've worked in the sector, this has just always been par for the course. And you've been exposed to it since you started as well. And so it's really hard to imagine a different way of working, not constantly chasing your tail. We're all striving for that quiet period we hope will come so that we can catch up and reset, but it never does. The second reason is that the organization has forgotten what is realistic or reasonable for us to achieve. And you're not having honest conversations about what is actually possible. And this is happening because we have funders who want more strategic plans that are perhaps a little bit too ambitious and very, very limited resources. But rather than name that gap honestly and make some of the difficult decisions that you perhaps need to about what to prioritize, what to delay, the organization absorbs the pressure. Leaders take on more, teams take on more, and everyone is silently agreeing to pretend that the work is manageable until it isn't anymore. And we know that this is driven by years of austerity, and that for some small and medium sized charities, because there simply isn't enough resource, you are having to wear 5 different hats and take 5 different roles. But the outcome is still the same. If we keep sitting in this place of busyness and we don't have these difficult conversations, you and your teams will burn out and it will impact on your ability to make a difference. And so the dedication to the cause takes over. And that dedication, while it's admirable, means that in the long run, you're risking the impact you want to make. Because when we're constantly busy, our thinking, our problem solving, our ability to see perspectives, and strategic thinking are all compromised. And as I said, we run the risk of burning out through this exhaustion, all of which means you and the charity won't have the impact you want to have. But you and the charity don't have to stay stuck in this cycle of constant busyness. It's possible to find a more balanced and sustainable way to work. But to do this, you need to be able to pause, step back, and have some honest conversations. And this idea of pausing and stopping when you're so busy can feel counterintuitive when there is so much to do. But honestly, it's the thing that will make work so much easier. And there are 6 areas I want you to consider when you do pause. The first is to start with what's actually working. Before you start to look at what needs to change or needs to be different, think about what you think are the strengths of the organization, of yourself, of your team. Ask your team where you are all at your best. What does good actually look like for your charity? What are you proud of? Starting from strengths shifts the conversation from blame and overwhelm into possibility. It reminds you all what you're capable of and it gives you something to build from. When we're conscious of what we're doing well, we can apply these strengths in different ways. And so we can find our way through the challenges more effectively. The second is to get honest about your strategy. Is what you've committed to actually achievable with the resource you have? Not in theory, but in the reality of your day to day. What pieces of work or areas of development keep getting pushed back, and why is that? Where do you need to invest time and resources first to deal with that and to enable you all to get to the strategic work that you want to? And what does a realistic version of that strategy look like? Third is to check your roles and resources. Do you have the right people in the right roles with enough capacity to do the work well, not the people who've just been around long enough? Look honestly at how workloads are distributed, whether your roles are clearly defined, whether people are being asked to carry work that sits outside their expertise, or whether there are positions where different jobs have been put together because that's all you could afford. And what needs to change and what can you realistically change to make all of this a bit smoother. The fourth is to look at your systems. How does the work flow through your organization? Are there predictable pinch points, budget management time, quarterly reporting, training cycles, the timing of annual appraisals that create recurring pressure points? And how often do your teams and managers have competing deadlines? What are you able to do in terms of changing some of those deadlines and how the work is planned across the organization so staff aren't having to juggle quite so many competing tasks? The fifth, and this is really important, is to make it safe to say no, to make it safe to ask for help, to make mistakes. This is a really important cultural shift that underpins everything else. Often we talk about it being safe to ask for help, but actually, the experience of our teams is very different. It means that leaders at all levels of the organization need to respond positively and curiously and consistently when someone says they're struggling or they need help or they're feeling stuck or something's gone wrong. And it means that you need to have open and honest conversations around the objectives that are being set for people, the KPIs, um, and where you're all heading. And it means that those conversations around the need for help or mistakes focus on how to resolve the issue, what can be learned, and not about blaming anyone. This doesn't mean that you're not addressing performance issues that are masked by busyness, but it means that those conversations are accompanied by support to help your teams navigate those challenges. And finally, it's about thinking about how you can put well-being at the center of your organization. The well-being of yourself and your teams and your staff isn't just a nice to have. It's essential for the charity to run effectively and to meet its aims. And that means that well-being isn't just your add-on of resilience training, of EAP services, of team building days. It means that well-being has to play a part in your strategic decision making. It has to play a part in how your policies are written and implemented and what your day to day looks like. It has to be part of all of these conversations because you can't build a sustainable charity on an exhausted team who are heading towards burnout. And that constant busyness, which results in overworked and exhausted teams, doesn't have to be inevitable. And it doesn't have to be how the sector is. But changing it means you need to have an honest conversation about what this looks like for you and your charity. If this conversation has resonated with you,